What's up, Doug? How you doing?
I am well. How are you, Joe?
Doing
Good to
good.
see you
Doing good.
again after last year's Snowflake.
Yeah, randomly bumped into you at the
Yeah.
I think a SQL DBM party or something like that. I think it was. Yeah, it was
Yep.
good to see you.
Well,
Very good to see you.
good to
Random.
see you.
Yeah, he gave me a nice pen, I believe. So, is that you or somebody else? Yeah. So,
Yep.
yep.
I have my very own pens. Can you read it?
Doug, the data guy. Yep.
Yep.
It's awesome. Yeah. Well, it worked. I remembered it. So that's cool.
Hey,
Um,
that's the idea.
that is. That's awesome. For people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. So, Doug Needham. The simple way to explain it is the first 10 years of my career, I was a DBA, making sure things were taken care of. Then the second 10 years of my career, I was a data architect, actually designing and making sure all of these things fit together. And then the last 10 plus years, I've been working as a data scientist in different capacities, and I'm currently a solution architect with data.
Awesome. It's quite a bit. I mean, done a lot of things. I think you also do work with data strategy and all that kind of stuff too, or speak on it.
Mhm.
So yeah, you kind of run the whole gamut here. Um, Walk me through that. The First of all, the role of DBA is something I'm always interested in. It's a title I think that increasingly you don't see a lot. Um,
Right.
yeah. Why do you think that is?
So, because it is not now, nor has it ever been. Like, great titles that people respect and look up to. I did. I started out my the things I did in the Marines as a DBA, that really kind of set the tone for my future career. So I'm proud to have been a DBA.
Yeah.
And when running into them, when running into other DBAs, there's lots of interesting war stories that we can talk about. Even relatively recently, I was just a few years ago, I was considered a data operations manager for, believe it or not, on-premise SQL Server. These guys did not want to do anything with the cloud at the time, and even though I had AWS experience already and had already worked with Snowflake and these things, but they were like, we're just SQL Server across the board. We've got all these clusters all over the place. You and your team have to take care of them. Okay,
Fun.
cool. Yeah,
And you know how to do it. So it seems like it's
yeah.
yeah. But the skill set that I think is it's especially the latest crop of cloud practitioners, it's going away. But
A lot of people are
interesting.
thinking this.
Yeah.
There's still a bit of a need for somebody that makes sure that things are running the way that they're supposed to.
Yeah.
Now, from a granted a data architect, data engineering perspective, they're probably a little bit involved in query tuning on cloud systems, but depending on what cloud system you're running, there there's the potential for still having a need there.
Yeah. That's interesting. And then data architecture is also another title that I have some questions on. So that's another one where I think it was sort of like DBA, where it was definitely titled back in the day, and now it's my impression of it is it feels like the work of data architecture hasn't gone away, but it
Huh?
feels like it's just been sort of disseminated to everybody these days. What am I off base on that, or what do you think about data
No,
architecture?
no, you're not off. There are a lot of people that are data architects, and essentially they come from the people that I've met. Let me put it this way. So the people I've encountered that think of themselves as data architects but are not. Let me be very clear about what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
Um, they kind of come to the title from an application development, and they're two very different things. With an overall application architect, yes, you're designing an application, you're doing this and that. If you're in the cloud, you're working with load balancers, so you work architect, does this fit in, and all these other things. So they're like, oh, okay, so I can be a data architect, design databases. Sure, you can. No.
Right.
um, and that's where eventually someone like gets involved because there'll be questions of, I don't understand why the application is so performing so poorly. okay,
Mm,
let's take a look, and I'll start taking a look at some data structures. It's like, you're I could tell you why it's not performing well. Uh,
mm.
would you just rather me go into doing the fixes, and this is what needs to do to fix it? So usually that's the answer. Just start fixing stuff.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting. What do you think about the architectures these days? I guess we're sort of, I don't know if we're leaving the quote modern data stack behind as a term, but the architectures are super prevalent these days. You mentioned Snowflake and
Hmm.
others. What do you think the role of architecture is when basically you can just compose stacks sort of at will from various off the shelf components?
So yes, you can. You can also play 7 iron. Um, you may or may not want to. So what I think of as an architect is um, someone that lays the for a technology stack, right? Um, identifies the points where things need to be clarified or not. Things like governance. Where do we need to have governance for this? Where does security fit in? They take, again, my opinion, they take a little bit more of a holistic approach to uh, the technology that supports the organization,
Hmm.
right? Whereas, application developers, they focus on getting the application right, but don't have to worry about some of those things. For security people, they come in and they look at all of the various things that they do, network configurations, patch levels, sysadmins, all of the above.
Yeah.
And if you don't have, it's almost like I think of the architect as the mic. So when you have a lot of experts, you're
Yeah.
various. I'm not a music guy. I just like to listen to it. You have people playing various instruments. You need somebody to bring them all coherent piece of music, right? And you've got a piano in the background, so chances are you know a lot more than I.
Who
But
knows?
you still have to have when you're dealing with a situation, you need to have somebody coordinate.
Yeah.
Certainly, an individual can grab their instrument, go stand on the street corner and play, and they're great, or may not be great. But for an enterprise, for a company, um, I think it's important to have a team or one person, depending on the size of the enterprise, that is thinking holistically and long term, rather than running around with their hair on fire, putting out the latest, issue.
Yeah. That's interesting. One thing I've been thinking about lately, and love your feedback on this, is it feels like things like data and architecture, as you point out, these are in some cases long-term exercises, right? Like data modeling, for example, it
Absolutely.
requires, I think, a broader perspective of the enterprise that is you can't
Hmm.
really just fit into convenient 2 week sprints. And I think
Right.
it's more of a thinking person sport. Same with architecture. And I feel like maybe one of the reasons that these practices like data modeling and architecture have, as you point out, some architects maybe spend their time chasing fires and putting them out all the time. It feels like we've the practices have become very reactive instead of maybe back in the day when maybe before agile when people were able to not work in such a sprint like fashion. But it feels like the disconnect is really that practices are very short term now. Even
Hmm.
things like architecture, I've noticed. What do you think about that?
I don't know that we have the time for me to talk all that. The
Okay,
way I
well,
have
we got
my
a few
opinions,
minutes, but
but I'll try to keep it brief. Um, I think the overall idea of an architecture of think of it as a small scale model of what you ultimately want to do. Uh, I think that it's missed because people are like, just I want to get something done, right? Not think
yeah,
about it. And yes, there's a time and a place, but there's also a time and a place for this, right? You can. One of my good friends, Kent Graziano, he talks about treating data structures as deliverables within sprints. So you have, these are your data structures. This is the way it's lined. So this is the data model that you're going to have. And we've done these things and we've set this up. Is this what the expectations? And that's, I think that's certainly one way to do it. He's been very successful with it. And in some of his earlier organizations, he's even won Agile awards for, conforming to, being the team that was most conformant to Agile principles.
Yeah.
So it can be done
for sure,
but you have to think of these design diagrams or whatever, even if it's a whiteboard thing that you ultimately put on a piece of paper. You have to think of them as deliverables, as artifacts that the business can review. It's not always a full blown application, a full blown stack. You can in the sales side of things, when people are putting together presentations, their PowerPoint is a deliverable. So there's an opportunity. It's just the opportunity is there for a little bit of time to be taken to at least get a general idea of what you want to do. You're not going to answer every question, and I know that. I'm not that much of an old timer to say, let's think of all the questions up front before we do anything. But you can certainly get a good idea of this is what you want to do. Or one of the things I like. And I use analogies from all over the place. One of the things I like from a mathematical perspective when I work with certain math problems is you can identify what is not the answer very usually. Okay, if I do this and this is my upper. I cannot go above this. This is my lower bound. Okay, I know I can't go below that. So the right answer is somewhere in here. I think the same thing can be done with design. So if you're working on doing something, I was working on a Cassandra implementation many years ago, and we started out saying, these are the general requirements we know we need to do. We need to be able to do this document. We need to be able to do this. We need to be able to do this. And so immediately, just based off of those, some of the things at the time you couldn't really do SQL Server or this was before Snowflake even. So we had to find a piece of technology to meet all these. So we did an evaluation and we found out that Cassandra could meet all our requirements. Okay, cool. So just based on that effort of going through and talking about in general, not the details of how we're going to do natural language text processing, but we know we need to work with documents. We know we need to do this. We need to be able to index on and on. Okay, well that eliminates a bunch of technology. It narrows it down to these handfuls. Let's do some tests. Let's do some evaluations. Hey, Cassandra's the best. That's the most supported at the time. Let's go with that.
What happened?
Ultimately, or before I left, prototyping Cassandra cloud implementation in a cloud that we were building, a cloud environment we were building since. And I won't say the organization, but as I understand, because of for a number of reasons, I knew ultimately the project was going to be less successful than a lot of people thought it was. I ended up leaving, and I talked to one of my coworkers. Her and I were basically building the whole thing. We were doing the implementation as well as the design, and both of us just knew it was going to be a mess. And I said, well, so like my last day, I told her, tell you what, in 6 months, I want to talk to you. Let's see where things are. And so I got a hold of her a little around 6 months later, and I said, so how are things going with that? And she said, well, I put it in my resignations.
Oh boy.
She said, this has happened. So and so was fired. Didn't get the budget we needed. On and on. I'm like, okay, so it was a train wreck. She goes, absolutely, it was a train wreck. We knew it from the beginning. So
interesting. How do you know when a project's going to be a train wreck? Like, what were some of the indications that something like that was not going to be as successful as most people thought, as you put it?
For that particular thing, our the high level executives were incredibly optimistic about things. We had one person set the timeline. Say, this is when we're going to be in production. They did not consult with any of the engineers. They did not look at any of the technology. And plus, the technology that we had was essentially all on premise. So we were going to take all this on premise stuff and we were going to build the cloud and deploy it simultaneously. And this all had to be done by D-Day. You can't just arbitrarily pick dates for stuff like that. This is it's legitimately, everybody talks about a paradigm shift. It was a complete paradigm shift for everyone because the majority of the teams had never done anything with a cloud. The team itself, our team that was building this, we'd never built a cloud from scratch.
Right.
And then there was the whole matter of funding. The budget. My manager, him and I worked together to budget out the whole thing, and we're talking $50 million plus. This was a significant budget that we were going to need. Yeah, in order to do all of this stuff because we're going to build it ourselves. This is, hey, we need to do this ourselves. We're going to build it ourselves. Cool. You better start writing checks. This is going to be expensive. And the budget that we ended up getting was, I think, overall $10 million.
Okay.
And
so not 50.
Not 50, not the 50 we asked for. As I understand it, and this happened, some of the stuff happened. My manager ended up bringing the project in. They had everything working. So again, this is like I said after I left. All of the moving pieces were there. We had a cloud built, the whole nine. But he was chastised because he went over budget up to 17. It's like, if you consider what we estimated to begin with, he was actually under budget. It's you guys that were that were not playing with others. So it was it was an interesting experience, certainly building all of those pieces.
Yeah, I can
scratch.
imagine. Yeah, building a cloud. I've never done that before, so I can imagine it's a bit of work, and you probably learn a lot.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But around that time too, I can't imagine there was like a like build your own cloud for dummies book out there that you could just
oh no, we were. That's the thing about some of the stuff that I've done is I will have done a thing or worked on a thing. And, I'll read about somebody writing a book about the same topic later, and it's like did that before they even knew what it was.
Mm-hmm.
So. Not everything, but there's a few things that I run into, and it's like, yeah, okay. If you want some advice on that, I did that 10 years ago, so
right.
Let's have a conversation. Yeah, and there's not really. I mean, there was a few things. I think we were using. I'll have to look at my library, but there was an open source cloud management console that you could basically plug in, and you had agents on all these machines, and so you could run virtual machines and stuff like that. I forget the name of it, but that was really kind of my first experience with things like Chef and the other tools for building out cloud resources and scripted.
Yeah. Oh, Chef, yeah, that's old school. Bring back back memories now. That's awesome. But fast forward to today, and it's interesting, right? Because I think one of the things we were talking about before I hit record was the topic du jour, which is now ChatGPT and large language models, right? So we've gone from basically rolling your own cloud infrastructure to now consuming insanely huge AI models in the cloud on your phone, and
right,
it's a bit of a different planet we're in. What are your thoughts on generative AI?
I like it, and going back to what I just said earlier, I worked a decent amount with neural networks many years ago, kind of early in my career, just trying to understand that cloud topic that I just brought up. That was I was working with a team of natural language processors, so they were doing a lot of text, and not generative, but certainly for understanding things. We were doing a lot of things with text back then, and there was a decent amount of people. I want to say somewhere between 40 and 50. Internally, these were linguists, mathematicians, programmers, the whole nine, working collaboratively to solve this particular problem in the healthcare domain. So it's very focused, very domain focused, very much, working with language rules. And also because we were in healthcare, it was more of a finite vocabulary set. And so they ended up being pretty successful for what they were doing. Now, when I look at the overall ChatGPT and large language models and things of that nature, they're interesting, or I should say not but. And I think where things are really going to be interesting is when you're trying to limit that into a particular domain, like a business domain, for example. There's some very generic things that I've seen it do with creating things, financial models, accounting reports, and things like that. Well, again, those are generic type things, right? When you get into something very specific with ChatGPT, GenAI, those kinds of things, that's where, in my opinion, you need to pay a lot more attention to what it's doing. What is it saying? I've heard about my daughter's very much up on a lot of legal stuff, and usually we have good conversations when there's a mix of technology and legal things. And so she told me about a case or a situation where lawyers use ChatGPT to make their case.
Yeah.
And then with the whole idea of hallucination, of course ChatGPT did it, but it cited this one case, and the lawyers didn't check it. The judge got a hold of it and said, there is no such case. This does not exist. And so what happened is, because you're doing generative text, of course it generated the case. It was not, that's what it was asked to do. Now the humans involved did not double check those things. And that's where, when you're working with those kind of scenarios, that's where it's going to be really critical. The input, the data that goes into your models, that is domain specific, that has to be high quality. The output, you have to have a process in place to proofread it. You cannot just assume that everything is going to be good to go the first iteration. You have to work with this.
For sure. I think I remember that example with the lawyer too. I think the judge ripped that lawyer a new one for doing that. And
as he should have.
Rightfully so. Absolutely. Yeah. What's interesting about generative AI and the enterprise is, I'm curious about the sorts of use cases, right? Like I think in our world, we see a lot of companies that are now tacking LLMs onto maybe a data warehouse for you to, quote, get searchable insights and all this stuff. But I always kind of harken back to the fact that I think a lot of the data sets in companies are, they're barely usable for BI.
Right.
But then we want to throw a large language model on top of that, because that will obviously improve things a lot.
Exactly. And I think, and this goes with not just AI, but this is kind of a general statement for all technology adoption within enterprise. You're gonna have large, especially in larger organizations, you'll have these executives that they get a good idea, they think, and they're like, oh, well, let's just throw this together and see what happens. That's fine. Doing experimentation is how we generate innovation, no question. But you can't discount the human factor. Right. Humans need to understand, what is this thing supposed to do as it relates to my business, what I'm responsible for, and making sure that it's doing that, and making sure it's plugged into the right data sources and on and on. That is, for now anyway, that's not something that can be automated easily. You need to have something supervised. And then once you get it supervised, you get everything plugged in, you improve your data quality, you improve this, you make sure of these things, then you can be a little bit less involved and start getting to where you trust the model more. It's just like a machine learning model. In that case, because as you start out, the machine learning models that I put into production, the first iteration or two, You have a lot of business subject matter experts reviewing the output. They don't care how it was done, right?
Right.
What the mechanism, but okay, the output of the model says these things. That's not what I was expecting. I was expecting this. Okay, we'll go back in the back room and tweak the model and retrain it, whatever, and then produce it. Now, does this meet your review expectations? That process needs to continue to be there, even for ChatGPT and generative AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly does. But it's interesting. You mentioned executives maybe wanting to throw AI into the organization. I'm sure there's a lot of reasons why. Maybe getting the board of directors breathing down your neck to, about your AI strategy and plans. Maybe you want to impress your other CEO friends that you're doing AI, and they're not. So
Right.
there's a lot of reasons for it. But you mentioned some interesting things. I mean, it seems like you kind of have a rule book, a playbook for doing this because you have experience with machine learning. What advice would you have to decision makers, maybe we'll call them C-suite executives, about maybe how they should approach and think about machine learning and AI initiatives in their company?
So one of my favorite quotes, and I think I heard this so I don't remember who said it, but having an AI strategy without a data strategy is a recipe for disaster. If you don't have that high quality, good quality data managed by good operations processes and procedures, it's garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
So that's one. The other thing, and I haven't heard this, although I'm not on top of everything. Back in the old days, when we were dealing with data warehouses, we had this concept of a data steward, right? The data steward had a good idea of where the right sources were. This data is high quality. This data, don't use it for those things, on and on. I haven't heard too many people mention an AI steward.
Yeah.
So there should be, again, my opinion, there should be some central, generally, it can be distributed, but you need to have someone that has an idea of what's going on with the objectives of what AI is meant to accomplish and how that fits into the overall business objectives of the organization, and then what it's doing. Where is it looking? Where are we getting this? There's some. I was recently on a call with one of our partners, and one of the questions came up that we have customers that would love to do that, but they're not going to do it until they know for sure that you're not reaching out to the OpenAI API and passing in a lot of data for it to do stuff, because that's a risk from their perspective. Because essentially, you're taking all this data that belongs to the organization and passing it out on the internet to an API call.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do that before. Why should we do it now? So there's got to be another way to do that, whether that be, better security, again, talking about security, or to your API vendors, whoever is going to be running your LLMs. Okay, fine. Make sure that's built in. Make sure it's auditable. And this, I just made it up, but this whole concept of an AI steward, you should be able to accomplish those things. You should be able to, this steward should be able to know where all the bodies are, as it were, for how an AI implementation is going to work. They don't necessarily need to be technical, neural network, that kind of stuff, especially because these large language models are relatively pre-trained. So, cool, but work with this pre-trained thing, but make sure it's talking for your extensions, for what it's set out to accomplish. If you're feeding it in data, make sure it's feeding from the right place. If you're doing, exposing data to it, what data are you exposing? Why? Is there, is that the right data? On and on. There's all these questions when it comes to an enterprise implementation of an AI solution that should still be thought of.
Oh yeah.
They can't. You can't ignore them. And yeah, it's fun okay, we're just going to plug this in and go to town. Sure, you can do some experimentation like that, but as the organization matures with working with the AI technology, having some idea of rules and audit and other things need to be in place, because if not, you risk having I forget what it's called, data exposure, data leak.
Yep.
And then you're embarrassed by the headlines of organization X. Hackers got a hold of a terabyte of data of their customer data. Well, that's not good either. So there has to be a line there. There's a fine line there. Well, I'm not. I don't think there's a fine line. I think there's a nice pathway for figuring out the right way to do it for organizations.
Hmm. I really love this idea of the AI steward, by the way. So good spontaneous title.
Having conversations like this, all kinds of.
Yeah, it is interesting. When you're mentioning it too, I was wondering if there's a role for AI to actually help as a steward. And sort of this, yeah, and sort of this weird circular reasoning. The AI is going to supervise the AI, and so forth. I've been thinking a lot about this from the perspective of data management, where I feel like the promise of AI is that we can maybe start doing the things that we've really struggled to do with maybe data management, for example, right? Proper governance and whatnot. And especially as data volumes continue to grow, especially with AI generated data, maybe that holds promise. But again, it's sort of like then who supervises that AI agent and so forth. And so this becomes, like I said, a bit of a circular reasoning problem, but definitely has a lot of
watches
potential.
the watchers type thing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I recently learned about, I spoke at the DataOps conference at the end
nice.
of April, beginning of May,
Cool.
up in Vermont. I've spoken there a few times, so it's a great event. I love the networking and talking to people and things like that. The DataOps community is kind of.
I was supposed to speak at that last year. Yeah, I was supposed to go there last year. Actually,
you
I was
were?
a bit bummed. Yeah,
Okay.
I ended up going to Munich instead, but I was a bit bummed. It seemed like a good time. So
Yeah, it is. I always have a fantastic time, and a lot of people do there as well. But one of the presenters was talking. Everybody talks about these LLMs, but there is such a thing as a SL, which is a small language model, which is much more domain specific, and it's not, not as robust or whatever. And so immediately when she's talking about that, I was, well, wait a minute, that would be interesting if you have an SLM that has a certain set of standards or whatever, and you have it reviewing the output of the LLM. Maybe that's where you could have something like what you're talking about from a governance perspective. And how the conversation went is I was asking her if she was familiar with anybody doing work building in Asimov's laws into LLM. And she said she wasn't familiar with anybody doing it. I think it's coming to a point pretty quick where we need to have something like Asimov's laws, certainly 0 through 3, and that should be the guide point of the output of these things. And how, I think, potentially, and again, this is all at a conceptual level, and as you said, we're just having a chat here.
yeah,
I think having an ethical SLM or a legal SLM, whatever, that looks at things from the perspective of, is this going to hurt anything? Is this going to, or what kind of damage could this potentially do for these things? And having that SLM review the LLM, that might be an opportunity for something like what you're talking about.
yeah. It seems like it. I was talking to a friend of mine who's an AI expert. Was it last month? We were driving around Silicon Valley one day for whatever reason, but he was telling me, yeah, he feels like small language models are the way of the future. Like large language models are almost too big in a way, right? So, and it was his opinion that the next big thing you're going to start seeing is the small language models, actually, because you can just custom tailor. And his wife works at one of the big tech companies. I can't say which one, but she's been doing a lot of innovation in that area, and I think definitely agrees. Like I think the trend has been from large language models, which are great for a lot of applications. I kind of consider it almost a new internet in some ways,
Right.
with
Yeah.
large language models. But again, you don't need all of Google in your business. That's a bit odd. So
Right.
yeah, it seems like they just work a lot better because they can be a lot more specific to your needs and aren't polluted with the entire internet. So
Exactly.
yeah, it's
One of
interesting.
the you reminded me of a conversation I had started having a long time ago. I've worked with in a lot of different places, and a lot of people get inspired by the Facebooks and Googles and these big tech companies of the world, and certainly they're there for inspiration for a lot of us that'll never walk into stores.
Right.
Um, However, as you said, you don't necessarily want to. I was talking to this kid, and he was like, "Well, that's not the way Google does it." I'm like, we're not a
Mm.
Google size.
Right.
We don't have Google's engineers. We don't have Google's resources. So going, oh, we need to build this just like Google. You're missing a lot of exogenous factors.
Yeah.
And yeah, we can follow some of their practices, but we also need to look at those best practices in the light of what our resources are and what
Yeah.
we're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think it's on a broader topic too. It feels like there's a lot of cargo culting when it comes to looking at the big companies, looking at the tech blogs. Maybe that's Google, maybe that's Netflix, Uber, whatever, and then saying, well, because they do that, we have to do that, right? But they're innovating at that level because they have to. I mean, even the early, Yahoo and Google, like MapReduce, for example, like they had to do that because it was necessary to run their business. It wasn't because they wanted to nerd out and and go off on some sort of a journey to create the most complicated tech possible. I mean,
Right.
But then, I think to your point, you talk to people at other companies. I think there's a bit of envy, perhaps. Like, oh well, that would look really cool on my resume, perhaps, if we could do something like that. So it's there's a lot of nerd envy out there. So
Oh yeah, and it's not just the way it's not just necessarily an envious type thing. There's also people are looking at what's going on with the economy. We hear the news about so and so's layoffs and this and that. And as an engineer, we're like, well, I want to make sure that I'm marketable. I want to make sure my skills are relevant. So I
Yeah.
want to, as much as possible, I want to do everything myself. So that I can I can survive what could be a bunch of layoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And I can certainly understand that. I've seen layoffs coming in other organizations and prepared myself and my team to make sure that they were marketable.
Yeah.
But you need to balance that with what's the best thing for the organization. Is the best thing for the organization you and your team jumping in and doing a bunch of low-level technical details when you could buy a solution for that, and then you could focus on these other things that are providing value?
Yeah.
So that's where you need to look at things from a long-term perspective. How do you provide value to the business? And that's one of the things that I learned some time ago working with data, working as a data architect, working as a data scientist. There's some really cool things that I could do from a data science perspective. It turns out that majority of what my customers needed were regressions. We're doing forecasting.
Right.
I didn't need to build a neural net for that. I could take the right data, do a regression, and say, this is the direction you need to go. Okay, that answers my question. Good enough.
Good enough.
And I didn't have to go do a bunch of other crazy stuff with neural nets and clustering and all the other things. And yeah, I'd tinker with them as appropriate and when I had a chance. But what is the value being given to the business if you provide a solution that is so complex that nobody understands it?
Right.
As soon as anything happens, that solution is going to be thrown away, and something else is going to come in.
That actually brings up an interesting point too, because we were talking about generative AI and large language models, small language models in business, and this seems to be where all the attention on quote data science is focused right now, is on quote AI. But you mentioned regressions, clustering, probably a lot of other quote old school stuff. I think I made a quip the other day. It feels like data science is experiencing sort of like a classical machine learning winter right now, where everybody's focused on AI, whatever the hell that means these days. But you mentioned things like regression, and it's like, well, can I chat with a regression? No. So it's not cool. So I don't know. But what are your thoughts? I mean, you've been a longtime data scientist. What are your thoughts on sort of like where old school machine learning, quote unquote, lives these days?
Well, the fundamentals are not going to go. Some of the tools are going to change and the skills are going to change for certain things, but um, the fundamentals, if you ignore them, you're going to fall flat on your face. I like basketball a decent amount, and uh, some of the players that I like are those guys. The sixth man. These are the people that they focus on the fundamentals, the dribbling, the passing, the running, getting up and down the court, layups, those kinds of stuff.
Hmm.
3-pointers are amazing, and they always raise the crowd, and I'm like, hey, this is great. And watching some of those things is like, man, that guy's really skilled. But the guy that's doing the layup is just as skilled,
Yep.
right? It's just doesn't draw as much attention. Those fundamental things um, are still going to be around. They're still going to win games. And the fundamental things from I talked about when I was my talk in Vermont. I talked about old school DataOps, things I did in the '90s,
Oh wow, that's cool.
supporting Desert Storm. It was essentially data operation because we had no developers involved. We migrated a database remotely in Southwest Asia. Um, we virtualized the mainframe. We did all of these things that, if you look at it from today's perspective, it's like, oh, that's DataOps. Wow. Okay, wait, you were doing that 30 years ago? Yeah. I mean, different tools, and people that use the tools nowadays could not do that, could not go work with the mainframes. But you can leverage those principles, the sound principles from legacy things, whatever legacy means, and implementing new things. So if you were to completely throw out all your rules for an on-premise database solution or data solution, because we're in the cloud now, okay, what is it? Where are you starting from? You're starting from scratch. You
Yeah.
really want to start from scratch? Let's figure out what can be translated into this new world, and then figure out how to enhance that such that we can build on this foundation of knowledge that we've had for such a long time,
Hmm.
and ultimately make something of value that's better. Those are good, sound principles to follow.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like you say, the fundamentals don't go away. Um, Interesting aside too. Kent Graziano was on my podcast, and as I started talking to him, I realized he was doing data ops before that was a term. This is probably in the late '90s, early 2000s, and I think you might have him beat actually in terms of chronology if you're doing this during Desert Storm. So I think I quipped and called him the data ops warrior. And so, but I mean, yeah, I can't imagine there was a rule book back then for quote data ops. How did you decide to embark on that?
Well, I was a DBA in the Marines, and what happened is how much time we have. So I'll try to make this short. The Marine Corps philosophy at the time, you had a mainframe that kept track of all your records. There was no PCs or any of those kind of things, but we were just adopting. So it really didn't run the business of the Marine. So whenever a force was deployed, these are called Marine Expeditionary Units, Marine Expeditionary Brigades, and a Marine Expeditionary Force. U, MEB, and MEF. And then they're kind of plug and play. You expand them depending on the needs of the theater and what you're dealing with. So the system that we had set up to work with Marines that were deployed was undersized because of the needs and the ideas that General Schwarzkopf had for dealing with this situation in Kuwait. It needed a lot of Marines. And as I understand it, there was somewhere between 45 and 90,000 Marines deployed during, wow. I mean, at the height of things. The mainframe that we had over there it was just dog slow. And you're dealing with things like logistics. What gear is going from here to there? HR, who is reporting to this lieutenant? Who is this lieutenant reporting? On and on. And payroll. The last thing you want to do is have a bunch of armed people that are ticked off because they're not getting paid or their wife's not getting a check or whatever. So these are three very important systems. And so what we ended up doing from Northern Virginia is we did a full upgrade of that system. We built another system, deployed it. The procedures that I wrote were how to take data off of the old system, put it on the new system. And that was all done with zero data loss. We didn't lose any data at all.
Dang.
This was, again, the 90s, early 1990, because it's when Desert Storm was. 1990, 1991. So the stuff that we were doing, and again, no developers were, because these were the applications they'd already written. Cool. So we just basically lifted up the applications, completely replaced the underlying infrastructure with a brand new mainframe, laid out the new database with the new sizes and stuff, and based on the volumetric analysis that I did, it was going to be about, I think, a little over 2.5 times the size of what was done in theater. So I had to build it such that it was a lot bigger, so that whenever they brought everything over, there was still room to be, able to manipulate those things. And I'm very proud of that work.
That's cool.
Those principles have stuck with me. Yes, if I really thought about it for a minute, I could talk about, mainframes, JCL, and this and that, if I wanted to. But they're not really practical for a lot of purposes, other than, talking with old timers at the bar about things we used to do. But virtualization, remote upgrades, migrating your data from a smaller size to a larger size. Now we don't have to worry about that as much when we have things like elastic storage. But all of that stuff, these were problems that we faced. There was a 12-man team. I was a DBA. We had some engineers, system engineers, and of course we had officers in charge of us going over there to liaison with the other officers. I did not deploy, but I worked on that system for being able to get it to where it could be upgraded in theater.
Dang. That's super impressive. So, well, a system like that too, it's there's a lot at stake, because you're actually in war.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So. I was reminded of that constantly. I was only a corporal. There were plenty of staff sergeants and gunnies that I worked with. It's like, remember, these are people just like you over there in the dirt that are, potentially taking fire. They don't want to have to worry about these things.
Right.
Let them focus on the warfighting. Because if you get worried about payroll, you get worried about HR, you're not paying attention, bad things can happen.
Oh yeah.
So we made it to where it was seamless, such that the people doing their value add business that they needed to do, they were able to focus on their business, and we focused on this. And they didn't have to worry about what we were doing, back behind the lines. So that message stayed important to me ever since then. So
Yeah.
I've always thought of data as people. And I know data is not people, but data represents people. There is, you're looking at somebody's payroll potentially, or what did they spend here and there? Did they buy the right thing? They return it? They don't want the system to be, oh, you never bought it. Because, we lost the records because we don't keep 2 years worth of data. Well, there's other ways to do that. So I've always equated the data that I manage with the people that are ultimately. And I think that's very important. And I try to, anybody that works for me or that I work with that have an opportunity to talk about this, that's one of the things that I bring up. You got to remember, data is not data. Data is representing the people that are using it.
That's such a cool perspective. And yeah, I agree. I wish more people would think like that. I think because
I agree.
Yeah.
I wish they would.
That's interesting. Kind of closing out, what are you excited about? What keeps you going? You've been in the field for a long time. You could probably do other stuff. What are you stoked on?
That's hard to say because I get excited about a lot of where I'm at now with DataOps Live. I do a lot of stuff where I'm onboarding customers with our platform. And if you're interested in learning more, go to DataOps Live. I don't want to treat this as such. And I know you don't want it to either, but we have a platform for doing these things related to Snowflake and managing your data ecosystem. Cool. So one of the things that I get to do as part of onboarding those customers is they're like, okay, I've got these tools, Informatica, Matillion, Data.World, blah, blah, blah. And we need to do these things in order to meet the requirements of our business. How can your platform help me? Okay, cool. And so let me work with you. Let me do a prototype. Let me, put some demos together for explaining how our platform can work with this technology or that technology or the other technology. So it's like everything's, I'm not going to say everything's brand new all the time, but each customer presents their own unique challenges. And again, with the perspective of let's help them make sure that everything's running smoothly, that becomes quite interesting. And that keeps me very much involved in everything day to day.
That's super cool. Yeah, especially because it's not the same routine stuff. Like I know just for the business I have too, you're always every day's a new adventure. Every client's got some challenges and great opportunities if they can get things going right. So that's
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, it's fun. How do you stay on top of learning new things?
I have my own library.
Okay.
My my ex-wife used to say that if she could keep me off Amazon, that would be that'd be a win for her. But I'm always buying books and trying to understand this and that and how things work. Um, so I mean, like I'm reading a book on generative AI right now,
Oh, which one?
and um, I forget the name of it. I'd have to go get it because it's in the other room.
Oh yeah, no worries.
But probably the one, yeah, Edwards. I think that's that name. So they're trying to understand the moving pieces. How does what is the black box doing under the covers?
Hmm.
Because that could become very important as we were talking about earlier. So um, constantly reading, listen to audiobooks, everything from technology to business to finance. I'm just kind of all over the place. I have a very eclectic collection of books that I read. So that helps me kind of keep up with things.
Yeah,
So
I'm the same way. My book collection is. I had to migrate it to Kindle because yeah, there's too many books around the house too. It's just I think there's thousands of books laying around, and more on the Kindle probably at this point. So it's ridiculous.
Mhm.
And same way, a very eclectic taste. Like I yeah, read all kinds of stuff. I was reading a book, Evil Geniuses. It's more about how I don't know, just how the current political landscape came to be. So
Okay.
yeah, it's I'm always fascinated by that, like history books. I love reading about history. But yeah, I think it keeps you, especially in this field. I think it's easy to get caught up in that. I think being myopically focused on tech. Um,
Mhm.
and there's Matthew Mullins was actually saying on Threads the other day about just how philosophy is really important for data practitioners and
Mhm.
technologists. It's something that's often really ignored. So, but reading widely is cool. It's awesome that you do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, cool. Well, thanks for the fun chat. I made a note that said wide-ranging, very enjoyable conversation. So, it's good to see. Are you gonna be at a Snowflake
That's a
Summit?
compliment.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Yes.
awesome.
Yep. I'll be out there in a couple weeks. Will you be there as well?
I'm gonna be there for I think a couple of the parties going on Monday night. Ethan Aaron's
Okay.
happy hour and probably a few other things. Maybe, I think Matillian's doing something too. So I'll be crashing those and then going back
Okay.
home. Yep, not it won't be at the conference itself. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, but cool. Well, maybe I'll see you there. So
Well,
awesome.
I'll be at the house. So if you do get a chance, well, that's where you could swing by there. But if you've already got a tight schedule,
Yep.
I won't stress you any further.
No, no worries. Thanks for the invite. Awesome. Well, have a good day. I'll talk to you later.
All right, take care.